Hi everyone, my name is Elena Kotanchyan and I'm an economics graduate student at California State University Long Beach, and I'll present my economics research thesis. I did my research on the impact of education on income inequality cross-country analysis. There is extreme inequality of income distribution worldwide. We can see that on the champagne glass distribution, the top richest percent of the world's population controls 82.7% of the world's income. At the same time, the poorest 20% of the world's population controls only 1.4% of the world's income. And this is evident in both developed and developing countries. So you might ask, why does it even matter to study income inequality? Well, income inequality leads to slow economic growth, middle class squeezing, higher unemployment rate, higher poverty rate, social problems, and even increased crime rates. These are all conditions we do not want to see in our countries. Following my personal curiosity and doing some literature review, I constructed the following research question. How do average years of schooling impact income inequality measured by the Gini coefficient for disposable income? There is no consensus in the literature. One set of papers found that negative relationship between total average years of schooling and income inequality. Other authors took it one step further and they found that only primary and secondary education negatively affect income inequality. College education actually leads to a higher income gap. My research is based on the theory of human capital and theory of returns to education. We know that returns to education are different at different levels. For example, the returns to college education are much higher than returns to high school education, meaning that people who finish college might most likely will get higher salary. So the person at the bottom of income distribution becomes more educated in period T plus one than they were in period T. The same happens with the person at the top of income distribution. They become more educated in period T plus one than they were in period T. And the gains in human capital are much more moderate at the top than at the bottom. And this is how human capital gap becomes smaller. And in general, world population became more literate. However, we don't see the decrease in income inequality. So this happens precisely because there is different returns to education. So the impact of higher aggregate human capital income inequality depends on how education human capital are distributed among the population. If only people at the top of income distribution are able to go to university, this is not going to decrease income inequality. Following literature review, I constructed the following model specification. Gini coefficient for disposable income is my dependent variable. Primary, secondary, and tertiary are disaggregated average years of schooling and my main variables of interest. Also, I add natural log of GDP per capita and its square term, trade, which is sum of imports and exports divided by the GDP, XIT set of demographic characteristics such as urban population, children, and elderly, lambda t and alpha I are time and country effects respectively, EIT is the error term, and stands for the country and T stands for the year. Gini coefficient comes from the World Income Inequality Database, and all my other independent variables come from World Bank development indicators. Overall, I have an unbalanced panel of 233 observations across 75 countries for the period of 1995 to 2015. So Gini coefficient is measured on the scale from 0 to 100. 0 means perfect equality when everybody has the same income. 100 means perfect inequality when one person in the country has all income and others have none. Looking at my descriptive statistics, there is good variation in variables, which allows me to obtain meaningful results from my regression analysis. Jumping straight into the regression results, in column 1 and 2, I use total attainment, so I don't disaggregate by levels. In columns 3 and 4, I do disaggregate by levels, primary, secondary, and tertiary. Also, in columns 1 and 3, I don't add any control variables except natural log of GDP and its square term. So in column 1, there is the coefficient on total attainment is negative, which means that total average years of schooling reduce income inequality measured by the Gini coefficient, and the results are significant at 5% level. However, in the column 2, when I add other control variables that might impact income inequality, The result is still significant. The result is still negative, but insignificant, and it also becomes smaller in magnitude. In columns 3 and 4, the results are very interesting. I found that more years of primary and secondary education lead to lower income inequality, but more years of tertiary education actually lead to higher income gap. And this is consistent with literature and theoretical framework. In column 4, when I add other control variables, the result is still the same. The only difference is that the coefficients are smaller in magnitude, and the coefficient in secondary becomes insignificant. So there is a negative effect of primary and secondary years of schooling on the Gini coefficient in model specification. So more years of primary and secondary education actually lead to a decrease of income inequality. However, at the same time, more years of tertiary education lead to a higher income gap. Some policy implications: governments have to focus on primary and secondary education first. Especially in developing countries, it's very important to establish good education system when kids can go to school and get at least primary and secondary education, because we saw in the results in literature and in theoretical framework that these are the years that this is the type of education that is able to reduce income inequality, right? And then when primary and secondary education levels are well established, governments have to pay attention to higher education. Um, if only people at the top of income distribution can afford and go to university, income inequality will not decrease. So people at the bottom of income distribution will have to have access to higher education as well. And this is also have to be a focus for many governments. For the future research, I want to add regional analysis. Regions all over the world are different, and it is important to acknowledge that cultural norms and other factors, level of industrialization, might impact income inequality. And I didn't add any dummy variables for the regions, and I plan to do it in the future. Also, it is important to add education inequality independent variable, because education is not equally distributed in the society, and we know that some people don't even get through the high school, and it is different for different countries, and this is important to add and see how it impacts income inequality. Also, the difference between males and females who attend high school and middle school and college also different between different countries, and it's important to see how that impacts the my results. Thank you so much. I appreciate you watching, and I hope I will be able to answer your questions soon.